Good morning.
Morning.
Whoa, I just pulled out my headphones. Can't hear you.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
There it is.
there we go.
That thing on.
Hello.
Awesome. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. I'm in a new location today.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was
Um,
excited to see a new beautiful creature.
yeah. Maybe there will be a cat. I don't know. There's some work that had to be done in our apartment, so we've been quarantining for 2 weeks, and now we're here. I'm at my mom's house waiting for apartment repairs to happen. So
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. Yeah, I also have cats
Pandemic.
around here. It's my
Oh, you have cats?
I live with 2 roommates. We actually just moved in, the 2 old friends. I have a dog who's the sweetest. He's up north right now in my parents' place because my roommates together have 3 cats. So we're trying to give them the lay of the land before we bring him in.
Got it. Oh, that's a lot of animals to make harmony with.
Yeah, I hope they do. I hope they do. Like they're all really sweet, but they're probably gonna hate each other.
Oh, good.
Um,
Yeah.
it's always interesting.
Yeah. Hey,
Yeah.
how's my connection? Is it okay? Not too laggy?
Yeah, I think it's great. Yeah,
Okay,
I think it's totally good. Yeah.
cool. Just wanted to check.
Yeah, connection's great. But yeah, we can jump right in. We can do whatever.
That might be good. I don't know how long your podcast is. But I have a call at 10, which is right after this time slot ends.
Okay, perfect.
So
Just
yeah,
let me
so if you
know.
want to get enough time.
What time is it there again?
It is 8:30, well, 8:40 right now. So we
okay,
have an hour 20. It's just that I wanted to, if you need like a certain block of time, then we have enough time for that.
No, you're totally good. Yeah, the length is arbitrary. That's one of the
Cool.
things I was super excited about is I just love the long form ones. At least the podcasts I tend to love are really long form, and I think that's a cool thing that I know everyone. I love when people talk about how that was kind of unexpected because you think like, oh, people will just get annoyed or like more than an hour. That's like too long. No one's going to do it. But it's like the opposite, and I think it has like a bunch of benefit just because, especially to the non-host, like to like yourself in this case. I think it's beautiful that like the first half, it's cool that I get to ask all the questions I'm super interested in hearing your answers to, but then it's just kind of, it lets it become more of just an open discussion to cool things where we're both just like, completely there and involved and exploring stuff.
Right. Yeah. No, it's fun. It gives you time to get into things, not just speak superficially about the key points. Yeah.
Get to exhaust the part where you just feel like you're answering questions or like all the things you plan to answer and I plan to ask. And then we're both just kind of exploring things.
Yeah.
I love that.
Cool. Thank you for the links, by the way. I haven't read or I haven't listened to any of his podcasts yet, but I'm excited about it. I've got it bookmarked.
Whenever you do have time and you do get to it, I'm sure you'll love him. And I'm excited to look into all the stuff we talked about. But yeah, and in terms of, it's a good segue, I guess, to get back into things. I definitely want to pick up where we left off in terms of tying, I guess a good segue would be tying sponges now into the larger frame of the ocean. Like just they're real, or the whole category, all the benthic creatures, sponges included. Why they're so important in the ocean, why they're important to the world, the things we already talked about kind of a bit, how in society what they do kind of for like humans.
Right.
But yeah, tying them in, and then we can talk about kind of their biggest risks too, like the biggest things threatening them, or like, yeah, we can jump right in, and then we can go broad from there. And
I hope I don't repeat myself. I kind of am sometimes.
That's okay. Yeah,
I talk a lot about sponges. So.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Feel free to, by the way, edit liberally, if you need to chop stuff, of course. But yeah, also if I end up totally repeating myself on something, just don't worry about it. Chop it. Or say, oh, you said that already.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. Yeah, I love the unedited piece. I love it just the way it is. I love it as a conversation.
Okay.
And I'm sure anything will be good for me and the listeners to rehear. So.
Okay, yeah, because I feel like if I said it, they have pretty much two really important roles in the ocean. So I'm like, I might have said it. I don't know. We'll see though. Yeah, but fun. And like I said, there might be kitten cameos. There's a kitten right there right now. He's just inspecting the room. So we'll see. Yeah, cool. But yeah, let's get started. Let's
Perfect.
talk sponge.
But yeah, so we talked about last time about how at least like one of the biggest things, the way they affect us is everything medicinal. So much of partly because they were the first ones that kind of got explored into, but they are one of the leading group of where we found medical use from the oceans, especially from the deep oceans. And then the secondary use, did you say it was just kind of they are the kind of um, like crux point of where a lot of the um, like from when you were talking about how everything's coming down from like the top kind of, and like they're the only ones that can process things to kind of create, they're a really important basis in any of those deep sea habitats. But yeah, were there
Yeah,
any,
exactly.
yeah, but yeah, we can go from there. Were there any like what were the other big things that, like the bigger parts of their role?
Yeah, so their filtering role is really important for affecting the water around them. So they eat bacteria and they really change the kind of the balance of nutrients in the water. Um, they're like any animal, they then excrete out waste, which we talked a little bit about fecal
Mhm.
pellets, sponge poop, but actually sponge pee or any animal's pee is also ammonia, which is fertilizer for plants or photosynthetic things growing in the ocean.
Mhm.
So there's that role. So it's all this sort of nutrient flow thing. The other really important thing that sponges do is they are just habitat. So
Mhm.
some will be flat and kind of coat the rocks like a soft surface that certain animals are very specialists on. Or you might find a sea slug, Rostangia pulchra, that's blend in completely with it. Um, I think my connection was a little choppy there.
That's okay. Yeah,
Did you lose
I was
me?
worried I lost you. But I
Yeah,
got you now.
I
So
can
yeah.
actually plug in if that's needed. I've got an Ethernet cable. I just hadn't set it up yet. So if it stays
If it does it again,
choppy,
we can do it.
let me know and I can
Yeah,
take a minute to plug in.
we'll do.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so sponges are good substrates, good habitat for others to live on. So in addition to the flat ones, there's lots of sponges that grow up and make these big structures.
Mhm.
And anything three-dimensional in the ocean has nooks and crevices and holes that other animals can burrow into. So there are a ton of sponge specialists and a lot of fish that will live among sponges as kind of protection from predators.
Mhm.
So,
What is it in
so
sponge?
yeah,
What is it that determines their shape? Like, are there different kind of families of sponges that have those different shapes? Like, are there ones that tend
yeah,
like the whole families that tend to be flat, and whole other ones that are like bottle shaped or curvy? But yeah, I'm interested in that. That's so interesting.
yeah. There's definitely a strong element of genotype of like the genetic makeup of the sponge that determines its shape. But then from that shape, there's a lot of flexibility depending on water flow. So there have been studies that will take a sponge in a wave exposed, sort of really rough, turbulent area, and they transplanted that sponge into a protected bay and found that the sponge then grew fingers up into the water column. And likewise, if they took that same species and moved it to open coastal zones with lots of waves, that sponge would change from being very fingery to being very flat. So it's both determined by the species, but also plastic, meaning it's malleable depending on conditions. And the main condition is water kind of turbulence and currents. There are these really neat sponges that are in the deep sea that are shaped like, I think, like gramophones. So they're really narrow at the base, and then they
Oh yeah.
come up maybe about a meter in the water, and then they flare really widely, like that big flare of a gramophone. Um, and we suspect that it has something to do with a critical height being reached where then the currents are good enough that the sponge changes its growth form from growing just straight up to growing out to take advantage of the flow that's happening at that height. We
That's
have not tested that. That's our hypothesis.
that's so cool. Is that similar to the way corals take their shape?
I think so. Yeah, corals are slower at it because they only grow like one layer of generation at a time on
Oh,
this
cool.
big dense skeleton. So,
Mhm.
but the way that the overall coral structure grows depends on how that particular generation grows and survives. So
Mhm.
yeah, if the water conditions change or if the coral polyps thrive more on one side of the colony than the other, then that side will grow more and it'll help direct the shape of the coral.
Mhm. So how strong is the relationship between sponges and corals in terms of not relationship, I guess, but like the evolutionary path? How connected are they?
Yeah, they're both animals, and they're both pretty. They're close, as in they're at the base of the animal evolutionary tree.
Mhm.
So they share a common ancestor, but I don't know how to quantify how much they're diverged. They're pretty different. They
Mhm.
probably split off from each other back in that Precambrian period when there were lots of other species and phyla, body types kind of coming about. So they have shared commonalities, but also they've had a lot of time to become quite different from each other.
Mhm.
That said, some of the research that I've done, looking at kind of what does it take to be a multicellular animal, we found some things that were thought to only go back as far as the corals and the cnidarians in general,
Mhm.
and we found them now in sponges. So we knew that sponges have what's called totipotent stem cells. So totipotent means able to, as for a stem cell, it means that stem cell can become any other cell type.
Mhm.
Um, and that's something that's not true in us, right? Our skin cells are not totipotent. They're stuck being skin cells. In sponges, they have totipotent stem cells. We knew that, but we didn't know what regulates stem cells. And from some research I did, it turns out that sponges have to kind of have an adjustable rate that they produce new stem cells or that new stem cells produce new tissue. And
Mhm.
those are affected by time of year, by time of day, by life stage of the sponge, by temperature. So it's a lot of things that are true in other animals as well. So basically, anytime that you have multicellularity, you need to have the sorts of checks and balances in place that would keep a population of stem cells from growing out of control, because you can multicellular body. So yeah, to become multicellular, you need to have your cells work together, and that means having an understanding among all the cells of who's reproducing and at what rate.
That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And we still don't know exactly what regulates those systems, like with the, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
We don't know on a genetic basis, but actually there are a lot of sponge transcriptomes and genomes now, that could be mined if someone takes the moment and goes and looks for it. And when I say takes the moment, that might be the moment of a master's thesis. But yeah, like that actually probably could be explored. Definitely transcriptome analysis has shown that there are a lot of genes that are present in sponges, that indicate things like stem cell regulation and cell cycle regulation and things that we kind of expect from, more advanced animals.
Mhm.
um, in addition to the kind of the other genes that I talked about last time, like the nervous system
Yeah,
kind of
well,
indicator
the ones
genes.
that our dendrites are based off of. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are actually a lot of neural genes that are, or neural analogs, so things that look as close to neural genes as anything else that we could think of.
Mhm.
um, and we don't know what their function is, so
Mhm.
it could be anything.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's
Yeah.
wild. So what right now, or like the kind of the drivers and the limits of especially deep sea, like marine ecology, or like any of the people that would study these kind of things, what are the biggest um, like industry or not, like motivators, like things driving research there, things putting the money into there, things like goals that are there, and then I guess after that, the limits to it, like what things are kind of slowing it down or endangering it.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. we have lots of goals or motivators. So definitely, I think the deep sea inspires curiosity and exploration still. So there is a very strong exploratory spirit.
Mhm.
And MBARI, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, where I was a postdoc, is great for that. Just going out there and being there so that they're present to discover things. Because if you're not there, you don't know what's there. So having a really strong presence in the ocean is a really big part. And they're great too for a lot of ocean observing technologies like the rover that we talked about.
Over. Yeah.
So things that allow us to see a lot longer and in a lot of different perspectives.
Mhm.
So exploration is a big one. And actually, MBARI is not alone. There's also the Schmidt Ocean Exploration. So that's, or Schmidt, I don't know what the terms are after that, but it's Schmidt Ocean Institute. It's basically a nonprofit exploratory research institute that was founded by Eric Schmidt, one of the CEOs of Google, and it's
Oh,
all
cool.
geared toward ocean exploration. So they have 2 ships that have remotely operated vehicles that go out and will do ocean exploration. And then there's also Nautilus and the Ocean Exploration Trust, which is funded by Bob Ballard and operated by the University of Rhode Island, but does exploration missions that are basically just, we know that we need to see what's down there, so let's provide the platform that lets us do it. So I'm actually going to be, normally I'd be going out, but with the pandemic, I'm going to be tapping in from shore on a research cruise that's happening October 9th through 16th with Nautilus. So we're going to explore Davidson Seamount and all the cool
That's so
corals and
exciting.
sponges that live there. Oh, I'm so excited.
That's
And I
so
gotta say, you know, I mean, the thing is, technically with remotely operated vehicle dives, you're sitting on the ship anyway. It's not like you're in the water.
yeah.
So the dives are going to be just the same sitting from home as they would be on the ship, maybe less seasick, which is
Yeah,
a
yeah, it
bonus.
could be better. Yeah, it could be even better.
Yeah,
So do you
yeah.
guys get to
So
operate it?
I do not operate it. I am
Okay.
not qualified. I wish I was better at video games so I could do that. I think
No,
it's
but
really good
that's one of
training
the
for
things
it.
that I'm most interested in is like things will definitely get to the point where you don't need to be you shouldn't need to be a certain level of crazy certified to be able to operate one of those things if you're a researcher. Like that's definitely to
Right.
me like a crucial bottleneck that needs to be passed is having much better robotics that can go in the ocean, like way more of them and like way easier to use ones for research and for all kinds of things. That's one of my biggest interests and motivators. But yeah, so I we can talk about this forever.
No,
But
that's great. I definitely want a little ROV.
yeah, you should have one. We're gonna
One,
get you one. Yeah.
yeah. Oh my gosh, that would be great. There are these little, there's an open source project for a do-it-yourself ROV, and it's not big. It's not like the ones that MBARI or Nautilus operates, but you know, it's a camera. It's an eye into the water, so you know you can be on a boat and you can throw it over the side and send it down, or on a dock.
You know what it's called?
So. You know, yes, in a moment. Let me just do a quick search. I know
Yeah, no,
that they've started marketing it as the Triton, but I think so.
that's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one of my that's like honestly my like leading interest in it is like ocean robotics. That's what I want everything to drive through.
Oh, right. Open ROV. That's what it's called.
Open
Yeah.
RV.
Yeah, Open ROV. So it's got a Kickstarter now. That's nice. So yeah, it's basically all open source, so you can buy all the parts for it,
Mhm.
and you can build it. It's got all the instructions on how to build it. So
That's so
yeah,
cool.
and
That's
you
all
can
I
end
want
up
to do.
with this small ROV, and you can, yeah. Oh my gosh, you should do it. And actually, there are a lot of blueprints online or information online on different models people have made, both of that one and other homemade ROVs.
Mhm.
So I agree. Although for the deep sea ones, it's tough. They need a lot. So
Yeah,
these things are
that's got to be a
the
much higher
size.
class. Yeah.
Yeah, those
Uh,
are the size of maybe an SUV and
Oh yeah.
probably way more than that. So those ones I can't drive, but there are pilots. So yeah, when we have a cruise, it's cool because you've got the scientists there, and then you've got right next to them the ROV pilots. And for the nice science ROVs, you usually get 2 pilots
Mm-hmm.
or sometimes two pilots plus a navigator, so someone who's kind of communicating with the ship.
Mm-hmm.
And so they are operating the ROV, and they have to worry about a lot. Like the ROV is connected by this long tether, and if the ROV turns in a circle, then that tether can get a pinch in it, kind
Yeah.
of like your garden hose would.
Yeah.
So they have to monitor like how many turns are in the tether and what direction are the currents going, because they don't want the tether to blow behind the ship's propeller
Yeah.
and potentially be in a path of getting cut. And they have to know that that tether is, you know, narrow, but if the ROV is 3,000 meters deep, then actually there's a lot of surface area of tether that's exposed to the currents. So actually it almost acts like a sail. So if the currents are too strong, it can pull the whole ROV back just because
Yeah.
of the pressure on that tether. So you've got then the scientists working with the ROV pilots to say, can we go that way? Or let's head north for 100 meters and keep the, you know, the camera view this close to the bottom so that we've got a good, solid, scientifically accurate transect. And the ROV pilots are flying that transect, keeping the vehicle straight, watching out for any obstructions and things going on. And if they're moving, they're also in communication with the ship. So then the bridge is responsible for moving the ship. And so they'll say, okay, we're moving 100 meters at, you know, 330 degrees and at a speed of 0.5 knots, which is pretty fast for an ROV. And so then, you know, the ship has to coordinate and everybody's sort of working together, which makes you realize then the ship's crew matters a ton because they are operating in the engine room and the engineers are dealing with power fluxes that are happening because the ROV takes more power when it's working hard. And you've got then the deck crew who are monitoring the tether on deck because you don't want to get slack in the line. You've got to bring it up and put it down. And so it's amazing how many people are involved.
There's so much coordination there. Yeah, that's an
Yeah.
awesome. This is it's almost it's so interesting. I'm obviously new to any kind of like being like podcasting and talking like this, but this is like the interesting case of when there's like a trigger point of when it's too many exciting ideas. There's like 1,000 things I could ask you right now, so I'm trying to limit.
What I wanted to do was tell it in a way that's showing you that you can get into doing ocean going marine science, yeah, in so many ways. So, you know, ROV pilots are people who get either certificates in electronics or mechanics, or they're people with engineering degrees in mechanical engineering or electrical engineering or systems engineering. And then you can go the whole route of marine certifications and doing like the boatswain or the captain's kind of route and path.
It's so
Yeah, and then actually with Nautilus, they bring in video engineers, so people who have fine arts training come in and do these things, and they have science communication people on board whose role it is to translate all the weird stuff that we're saying and make it understandable to people who haven't, you know, participated in a cruise before. So yeah, there's a lot. You don't have to go the whole science route to get to be involved in it.
For me, honestly, like the business part of my mind is screaming the loudest. There's all the complexity is so interesting to me, and I know you, but that to me screams the loudest in terms of there's so much room for simplification. Like in an ideal world, which is what you'd be thinking, it shouldn't be nearly that complex to get data and research from the bottom of the ocean. There needs to be better ways to coordinate the vessel to the ship, being able to like tether them like GPS wise, or have like a system that moves by itself without like, so that takes care of that person up there taking care of that, or like needing to have two drivers, or needing to have even any more than one, or just there's so much simplicity that it can be added there when you think of it in terms of like a design standpoint of like, you know, like Steve Jobs, the way like Apple is just simplicity. You shouldn't need to worry about all these little things. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to do this. So for any of those people that have that burning passion for exploration, which I'm so glad that's the first one you went to for the motivators in the field, because that's definitely what I probably feel the strongest, and I like feel a kinship with for people that have that. But yeah, that just like, and like the sciencey part of it too. But like understanding down there, like it's a new frontier and it's an interesting frontier, and it's such a scientific frontier. At least maybe just the lens it's always been put under. You know, like there's almost at least in my mind, there's almost no one that wants to just explore there and isn't interested in the science of it. You know what I mean?
I think
Something I
there
haven't thought about
actually
before.
there are
Maybe
some
that's totally
industries that
wrong.
are interested in the deep
Yeah.
sea. So yeah, I kind of got sidetracked because my favorite is the ocean exploration side. But yeah, there is also commercial interest in the deep sea. So there's a lot of deep sea fishing. So as we've fished out stocks of fish populations that live in shallower water, our
Mhm.
technology has improved to be able to access deeper and deeper water. So there are fisheries for things that live in the deep ocean. It's tough. It's not very sustainable to do that because there's not a lot of food, so everything grows very slowly and is very long lived, but it's happening. And then also
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot of interest and a lot of money going right now into deep sea mining. So that's the idea that well, the deep sea floor has a lot of heavy metals in it, especially near places where there were hydrothermal vents, either now or in the past. So
Mhm.
hydrothermal vents are these really cool habitats. Maybe you recognize them from David Attenborough documentaries with like the black smoker spewing this smoke, 400-degree smoke up into the water column. And there are these massive tube worms and bacterial mats. And it's this really wonky, really unique habitat. But that superheated water passes through the rocks and helps to leach out a lot of metals like copper and manganese and other things that are becoming more and more in short supply in land. So there's a lot of exploration right now going into deep sea mining, and that basically looks like a vacuum cleaner that goes along on the deep sea floor and sucks up the sediments and then pipes it up to a ship to then sift or sort out and then pump back down and spew back out to the seafloor.
So they're sifting purely though like sediment. It's kind of free floating water. They're not like grabbing thing. Like they're not like there's no like digging. There's no grabbing actual like rocks of size. It's like pretty small. It's being
It's
sifted.
it's not rocks, it's grabbing sediment, but they're grabbing whatever is there on the sediment surface, and I don't know how far down they go. And that
Like the
so yeah,
depth.
it's definitely going to remove whatever animals are there,
Mhm.
whatever life is there, and it's going to affect the what can live in those sediments in the future. So there's actually a International Seabed Mining Authority, which is a coalition of industry policymakers and scientists who are working on looking at what would the implications be of this, because um, a lot of venture capital has been put into it, and a lot of businesses are already building prototypes, and actually some companies have already started doing exploration.
Mhm.
So it's happening whether we are ready for it or not. So this International Seabed Authority is trying to jump ahead of it and at least kind of
Mhm.
figure out how to regulate it if it's needed. And
I feel like it's
yeah,
definitely needed. Yeah, like, I feel like
I
it's
think it's
definitely.
needed. My very strong opinion is it's needed.
I
It's
feel like it's definitely not just
yeah.
like the life's not gonna just be like totally unbothered. Yeah, like this is
Mhm.
not hurting us at all.
Yeah,
Keep going.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, exactly.
I
The other big thing that happens that affects deep communities is oil exploration.
Mhm.
So a lot of the time when oil drilling platforms are put in, they are, drilling in sediments that are deeper than 1,000 meters. So it's the deep sea.
Mhm.
And it's, definitely when there's a spill, that's clearly a problem. But even when there isn't a spill, when those are being first installed, um, there are big changes to the community. So that's actually where funding came for one of my postdocs. So I was a postdoc with the University of Alberta, but I collaborated with the Institute of Marine Research in Norway to study that geodia, that volleyball sponge. And the
Oh, yeah.
reason we were asked to study geodia was because the state-run oil company, Statoil, had noticed that geodia, which makes really big habitats that are pretty important to the fjords in Norway,
Mhm.
would disappear from areas where they were actively drilling new oil rigs. And
Mhm.
so they wondered what it was specifically about the drilling that was affecting geodia. Was it the clays that were kicked up and so it was all something natural, or was it something like the mine tailings, or the tailings, kind of the larger particles? And the idea was maybe they could figure that out and then they could try to mitigate that a little bit or lessen that while they were drilling, and figure out why Geodia was disappearing when they drilled, because
Mhm.
they couldn't see the sponges run away. They don't run away, they would die, but they couldn't figure out what it was that was killing them. I'll be
Okay,
right. Sorry, just one moment.
totally fine. Yeah, beauty of editing.
That's the kitten.
Yeah, no, you're totally fine. Yeah, beauty of editing. I also
Yeah.
actually have a little
Yeah.
kitten on the bed. I don't know, like there's a black cat over there
Oh,
too. Yeah, that's Binks. Yeah, that's my roomie's cat.
aw, hi, Binks.
He's sweet. He loves it in
Cool. That was Marbles that you just saw.
marbles. He's
Was
cute. Yeah.
he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's our pandemic kitten. We found him
Oh yeah.
on the street. Yeah, we found him on the street meowing all alone, and we were like, "There's a
Oh,
kitten. What are you doing? There's just one kitten."
yeah.
So yeah, now we have a
Is he like
kitten.
real little?
Yeah, yeah.
He is.
We estimate he was about 6 weeks old,
Oh,
so a
so
little
real
too
tiny.
young to wean, but
Yeah,
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 he was
yeah,
tiny.
yeah. Well, good thing you guys found him. Yeah.
Yeah, he's fun, but boy, kittens are a lot.
Yeah, they're wild. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um.
yeah, that's deep sea mining and that's oil rig drilling. So those are the kinds of things that I
Oh yeah.
think
What did you guys find when you
motivate.
got hired for that postdoc work?
Oh, we haven't published that yet, but we found that the sponges responded actually just as much to the sediments that were kicked up as natural sediments as they were um, to clays, but that bentonite, which is another naturally occurring mineral, but is one that's enriched when they do their drilling. Bentonite caused kind of stronger behaviors in the sponge, so the sponges were less happy
Mhm.
and pumped a lot less. Basically, all that stuff kicked up in the water affected the filter feeding that was possible. So the sponges were stopping because of that. So it
Gotcha.
looks like everything will cause a sponge to stop pumping if it's kicked up sediment in the water, but there are sediments that can cause greater effects,
Mhm.
and bentonite was one of them.
So,
Bentonite also contains a little bit of radioactivity in it. We don't know if that was the cause or if it was just the size of the particles of the bentonite.
uh-huh.
Hard to
So when
know.
you use the word enriched in that context for like bentonite, does that mean
Mhm.
like bentonite is in higher concentrations in that like form, or yeah, I guess what do you mean by enriched in that?
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
No, you're
basically
totally
that when they would drill into the sediment, they would drill into the sediments, and just like when you drill in a piece of wood, your drill gets hot. And so they would pump down drilling fluids that would help to
cool.
lubricate the drill and cool it. And that fluid would have bentonite in it because that was a small mineral that would help to lubricate it a little bit. So there was, while bentonite is naturally occurring in some places, there was more bentonite. It was enriched in that particular fluid, which meant that they were adding more bentonite to the water than would otherwise be there from being kicked
Okay,
up by, yeah,
gotcha. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it had to do with the concentration or like the form that that bentonite was in. You know, like if it
I
was
see.
like calcium in this molecule instead of like this pure or like simpler one.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure if it was
Yeah.
that. And the other question, just in terms of sediments versus like clays, rocks, just the term sediments just have to do with particle size. Like,
Oh, right. Yes, they do. So sediments, I think is sort of the catch-all term for any minerals that are tiny and
okay,
particles.
that's what I thought. Yeah, to me,
Yeah, and
like
then
yeah, the very much smaller particle size, like of rocks or clays or anything. Yeah, just the
yes,
catch-all.
exactly.
Yeah,
So
duh.
clays and silts are the smallest particles, and then you go up from there to sands and pebbles and cobbles and
Well, clays
rocks.
are smaller
Yeah,
than sands. Interesting.
yeah, clays are really tiny. Clays are interesting because like they don't even sink in the water column very easily. So you can end up with clays that are suspended and then travel really long distances in the water because once they're kicked up, they don't sink back down again as quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So if things are affected by clays or other small particles, then that halo or range of effect can be a lot bigger than if they're affected by larger particles.
Mm-hmm. so it makes them more sensitive. Yeah, that's more of a thing to look out for. Interesting. Well, yeah, it's cool you guys found that out. I'm excited for that to come out. Yeah.
Yeah, we got to work on it. I wonder if that's the spot I could put that Green Day part in there too, of saying, hey, maybe you should look at whether noise affected them.
Yeah,
I think actually,
at the very least, at the end of that like article or paper, like this is something else we found. I guess also like worth looking into that
I think I
affects
should just
there.
tweet it to Green Day. You think they'd like it? They'd probably
I
be
think
cool
they
with
would like it. Yeah,
that.
they would.
Billy Joe Armstrong seems like he'd be into that.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
In
So,
that, yeah.
oh, I just wanted to say too, rather than making it all sound like sponges are in trouble because of what we're doing, well, okay, we're related to this one too, but climate makes a big impact too. So there are things that are not direct activities that we do in the ocean that still affect it, including the deep ocean. So, yeah, climate change is causing warmer water, even in the deep ocean. That's going to happen, and that really affects the metabolic rate of animals, invertebrates. So if your metabolism increases, then you need more food. And there's a big concern of asking, well, what happens if the metabolic rate of deep sea animals increases faster to something that's faster than the amount of food that they can be supported by in their habitat? So that's sort of a long-standing question of, we don't know which animals are going to reach their tipping point at what time. That's part of why I'm interested in looking at this balance of food to or metabolism versus respiration, is trying to figure out where they sit in that energy balance.
So how does the temperature change affect the respiration?
So we are warm-blooded. We keep ourselves at a constant temperature, and that keeps our metabolic rate at the same rate. For cold-blooded things like reptiles and for all invertebrates, they don't get to regulate their metabolic rate. Instead, temperature does. So that's why you'll see lizards sitting on warm rocks, and they're more active after that, and then they kind of cool off and chill. In the ocean and all invertebrates, it's the same. When it gets cold, their metabolic rate slows down.
Okay.
And then when it gets warmer, they speed up. And there's a tipping point where they get too warm and then they don't do well at all, just like us. But generally, it's, it's kind of like you run faster, you run hotter, and then it's too hot. And so while you're running hotter and faster, you're needing a lot more food to fuel yourself, because you're using more, you're breathing faster, your heart's pumping faster if you're a worm or sponge. Okay, sponges don't have hearts. Oh, it's always hard that way. But they're working faster. Yeah. So that's the idea. That's one idea. The other one, not so much for sponges, or it's not known for sponges, but especially in things that have calcium carbonate in the deep ocean, it's a big problem that ocean acidification is occurring. So really quick, ocean acidification is a byproduct of the increased CO2 that we have in the atmosphere. So the CO2, when it dissolves into the ocean, which it will because it's kind of equilibrating and balancing, there are a couple chemical changes that happen that produce carbonic acid and bicarbonate, which are and basically makes the ocean a little bit more acidic by having that CO2 in there. And that's been happening. The problem with that comes from animals that have calcium carbonate and that need to calcify, because calcium carbonate dissolves, and if you decrease the pH, if you make it more acidic in the ocean, then calcium carbonate dissolves faster. And animals have always been kind of struggling with this balance of producing their calcium carbonate skeletons or shells at a rate that's faster than the rate that they're dissolving slowly over time. But that also is a balance that's getting tipped by ocean acidification. And it's a really important balance for deep animals, because pressure actually changes the chemical kinetics of that balance.
Faster dissolving down there.
Yeah. So it means that we now have what we call the calcite compensation depth, and that CCD is where the rate of calcite deposition is equal to the rate that calcite is eroding away. And so basically any calcification that happens below that depth, or any animal that sinks below that depth, it cannot produce calcium carbonate fast enough to overcome that calcite compensation depth or that dissolution rate. So you could think like who calcifies? Corals, snails, lots of mollusks that live in the water column, clams and bivalves, a lot of smaller animals that live in the sediments. So
So is
there are
that
a lot of,
it's fatal for them? Sorry to interrupt.
well, it
Yeah, go.
depends on the importance of the shell. So, in something like an arthropod, they have calcium that helps harden their exoskeleton, and all of their muscles attach to their exoskeleton. So if their exoskeleton is weaker, their muscles may be weaker, or they're just more susceptible to predators. In something like a coral, if it can't grow new coral skeleton, then that can really affect how a coral can grow in a certain place. And then in things that produce shells, like snails, it's variable. They're probably more susceptible to predators, but maybe the shell can be a weaker form. But that said, there are also pelagic snails, and the swimming snails need those shells to be a certain, they already needed their shells to be lightweight because they needed to be for them to be able to still keep their shell and swim. So yeah, different animals are susceptible in different degrees, but it's not great. They kind of had a balance worked out, and that's imbalanced or is getting out of balance more.
Wait, that's really scary.
So temperature and pH are affecting it a lot.
Side of it, because I knew at least like the basics of like the acidification of like the ocean because of the which kind of carbonate was it? Calcium carbonate. What am I? Carbonic acid. The more carbonic acid that's formed. But yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah.
So is that the CCD, that level, just like the height is getting higher all the time, and like everything below that? That's wild. That's horrible.
Yes.
Yeah. How are they getting by?
I know, and in different oceans, it's more or less affected. So there's always been a shallower calcite compensation depth in the Atlantic versus the Pacific. So that one in the Atlantic is much, much shallower now. And in the Pacific, it's still deeper than it's ever was in the Atlantic, but it's getting shallower. So yeah, it's been something that we can watch with like ocean monitoring over time, and we can recognize based on concentrations of things and what we know about the kinetics and experiments where we grow things at different pHs. We can see who's dissolving when, at what rate. There are a lot. If you want to get sad on Google Images, you can look up like well, it's not an easy thing to spell, but coccolithophores. They're these really cool little plankton that make these beautiful shells out of these layered gridded plates. They look like a soccer ball made of plates that were glued together. I don't know. They're just beautiful little plankton. And they're responsible for plankton blooms that turn the ocean this beautiful milky turquoise blue. And they're important exporters of carbon from the surface. And they are really susceptible to dissolution. So even in shallow water, if you look at coccolithophores from certain blooms and oceans, you can see dissolution happening. And in Google Images, you can look up like dissolving coccoliths and see just what that looks like. So it's rough. It's kind of a grim part of studying ocean science.
But it's so important. So we know exactly to what degree and how we can stop it and motivating people to stop it.
If we don't know, we can't know that there's anything to do something about. So it's all important to know about and to monitor, because where should our efforts be focused? We want to look so there's warming temperature. There's also the rising calcite compensation depth. There's also one other, I think, major thing that's affecting the deep ocean right now, which is the spread of low oxygen zones. So there's always been low oxygen in the ocean, but when it gets too low, it's just too low for a lot of life to be able to live in. And there are a lot of different causes for it. A lot of the time it's nutrients that kind of come into the ocean from river runoff, which brings a lot of fertilizers, which then it's kind of weird because we say that it's really important for export from the surface ocean to kind of fall in marine snow to get to the deep sea. And that's what feeds the deep sea. And that's true, but there can be too much of a good thing. And so if there's a lot of river runoff that has a lot of fertilizers. You can have a big plankton bloom that's triggered by that. And it's so big, all of a sudden there's this big dump of, dying phytoplankton and zooplankton down to the deep sea. And that, remember, it's got 1,000 or more meters to fall on its way there. And on that way, bacteria are growing and eating it and breaking it down. And when there's so much food coming at once, there are a lot of bacteria coming at once, and that can actually make that mass of food become, or that mass of water that comes with it, oxygen poor. And then you end up with, basically a rain of not enough oxygen and too much food, and a lot of oxygen usage at depth too, where bacteria are degrading it at depth. So in these oxygen dead zones, then a lot of animals can just die. That's terrible, right? But we want to know where that's going to happen, and if it coincides with the calcite compensation depth or deeper, or kind of what are the stressors that are going to be affecting a particular habitat. And when we're looking at somewhere like Sur Ridge, where I've done work lately, this is a ridge off the coast of California. It's not too close to any river mouths, but there are plankton blooms that happen above it. Is it possible that we could end up with a dead zone? Well, the top of the ridge is around the oxygen minimum zone, so it's already at a low oxygen concentration. So that could be pointing toward one thing. And what do we know about the compensation depth for calcification in that area? So where might we think the corals might be at risk, if at all? So it's nice to be able to put our study systems in context of all of these stressors.
So is it relatively new? Of a field is studying these oxygen dead zones?
I think it's been spreading. Yeah. So it's always been known that there were oxygen dead zones, and but I think on our coasts it was noted probably in the 2010s or maybe the 2000s.
When they discovered the oxygen.
That decade.
Yeah.
That there were oxygen dead zones that.
Oops. I still gotcha.
Looking at what's going on.
Oh, okay, 1 second. I missed a minute there. I think it phased out. That might have. I think that was me.
Did I?
I don't know if I think it might have been my internet for some reason. I don't know why, because mine was flickering.
Oh.
I just missed the last minute. It's okay. In terms of
okay.
What did you?
I talk a long time.
No, I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear what you said.
Oh, yeah. So I think Oregon was the first place that I remember learning about oxygen dead zones, and so they happen every year off of part of the Oregon coast, and so they would find these areas with a bunch of dead crabs and dead sea cucumbers and things, and they were monitoring the oxygen. Yeah.
Runoff.
Exactly. So now they see that it's a yearly thing, and it's becoming longer or occurring earlier and lasting for a longer stretch in over time. So it's something where monitoring has been really, really important, because we otherwise wouldn't know that it was changing. We would say, oh, there was an oxygen minimum, or a hypoxic zone, place where there's not enough oxygen. And there are a lot of dead animals, and that's interesting. Maybe it's just always dead here. So it's really important to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, that's important.
And what's changing.
Do they have any counter methods that they're starting to try yet? Are they still trying to just gather understanding, or are they? Yeah, I guess have they just started trying to implement anything to counter it?
Yeah, I hope so. I don't know what you can counter at that stage of it, right? I think the easier spot to make change to is to the runoff.
Yeah.
It's the same problem that's happening in the Gulf of Mexico. The Mississippi River is huge, and it travels past so many states, and so many really important farming operations get their water from there. But by the time that water leaves the Mississippi River and enters the Gulf, it's just really full of a lot of nutrients from fertilizers and things. And so, there's a lot going out there, and pesticides, things that can definitely kill life, and anything that dies, whether it's plankton that were caused to bloom at the surface or whether it's stuff on the seafloor, once it starts being broken down by bacteria, those bacteria use up the oxygen, and then you end up with these oxygen dead zones. So yeah, lots to monitor in the deep sea. It's not all cool to explore. Some of it's sad.
Yes, that is important.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, we explored, when we were exploring the sponge reefs, we've ended up in places that were fished, and it's rough to know how it looks, when everything is doing well, and then you.
Sorry,
that's adorable. That's adorable. Good kitten. So it's tough because we know what the reefs look like when they're healthy, and then to go and see these areas where trawls have come through and pulled everything out. It's hard to see. You see piles of dead sponge rubble, and you know that therefore there were sponges there and these big sponge reefs because that's what's nearby, but they're just not there anymore. We get quiet when we see that. Yeah.
That's so sweet though. That's such a good community. I feel like, I think maybe because of that, like kind of the deep thing that it pulls on, it like exploring the ocean and how just the magnitude of the ocean and what it means. I feel like at least people that I've met, like yourself, that's like their passion, and the thing they're involved with is like just the ocean and like deep sea exploration. There's so much, the level of like passion there. It's like a different like level, like I haven't met like a person that's actually working in that field. Not that I've met tons, you can speak to it better than I could, but I feel like there's no one there that doesn't like deeply care about it. You know what I mean? Or like there's the percentage of those people is way less than like other things. Like I just think, something in it, it touches something inside,
it does. Jacques Cousteau, I mean, he would talk about how connected the human heart is to the ocean, and just how connected a feeling of home for it. I mean, even though we don't belong there, and I certainly feel alien when I'm scuba diving in it, and I know I don't belong. But at the same time, it's comforting, right?
It's like I want to belong here.
Yeah, it's grounding and it's nice. So I think we all find a lot of value in it, and therefore it feels like an honor and a privilege to get to work on it and study it. And then you feel this, because you care about it, I don't know, I feel a call to action to try to do something to understand it a little better, so that we can at least know what we need to do or could do, if anything. Sometimes it's hard when you're like, I don't actually know what we can do yet, but you have to get past those stages first.
Exactly. Yeah, it doesn't mean at all it's not worth thinking about.
And we need innovative people in different fields who care. It's nice with your business background, I mean, you have a different perspective in looking at how other people may look at the oceans, or, or how people can kind of take advantage of things sustainably, and just kind of keep that perspective too.
Kind of on that path, with the three kind of dangers you just described, is there one of them in particular that you find yourself thinking about more predominantly than the other ones? Like in terms of like, it could even be interest in it, or just like you understand that one the best, or it's the one you worry about most. But is there one of them? Which one of them do you think about the most?
Ooh, lately I've been thinking more about temperature, but I'm gonna say oxygen because that's the one that I've spent the most time thinking about in the past. So again, because sponges hold this funny prize spot there near the base of the animal evolutionary tree, there's always been interest in, what can sponges tell you about early life on the planet and early conditions on the planet. So there have been papers that have come out recently that basically did tests on sponges to look at how sponges do in low oxygen conditions. And they said, look, we made the conditions similar to what we suspect it may have been back in the Neoproterozoic, way, 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 way long ago, before the Cambrian explosion. And sponges were able to survive, which I would argue they were able to hold on. They didn't thrive. But okay.
You're able to not be gone forever.
Yeah. But you know, so they found that, and they were like, so now we have some view of, you know, animals and life being able to exist in these early oceans, as early as when the ocean had this oxygen concentration in it.
Mhm.
So we've taken that perspective a little bit in asking about the limits that sponges could tolerate, but also just I think it's interesting from the standpoint of that energy balance again, because they are going to breathe what they need for them. They actually breathe less and they reduce their activity to adapt to it. So
Mhm.
it's neat to basically go, oh, wait a second. Once again, I was looking at this all from a very human perspective instead of letting the sponge tell me what was actually working. You
Mhm.
know, me, if the oxygen concentration got low, I might start gasping, and trying to get more. I might, you know, slow my activity, but I can't slow down certain things. And so eventually I just wouldn't be able to manage. And a sponge, I'm sure that's true too, but they're able to first just slow down what they're doing and shut down more and more parts of themselves. And it's just another way of being like, ooh, life. Oh, I'll use the Ian Malcolm quote, life finds a way, right? Like it's pretty cool. Just that they're able to kind of tolerate these things that seem completely intolerable to us.
Mhm.
So not that I'm trying to subject them to torture. I just like, they don't seem to mind. You drop them down low
No,
oxygen
exactly.
and
I
then
mean,
bring
it's
them up,
important.
and
Yeah, the reason you're
yeah.
doing it is really important. So here's a fun. The reason I asked which one of the ones is the one you think about most is because now I want to play like a fun thought exercise, more on that business side, like you just said. Um, and this will be, I don't know if you've ever spent time thinking about it, but just from your perspective, your everything you know, your intuitions about it. If me and you had to tackle that problem right now of we can't really track ocean dead zones, I guess, yet, but we do suspect where they come from those like runoffs. What would you do to solve that problem? What are there any things that come to mind intuitively or not that you think would help? You know, like at the especially like the Mississippi and like big spouting points like that, if there could be like some kind of sieving system where they could at least contains that runoff to, I mean, that probably wouldn't be good for the bay, but it would at least like some way to keep it from spreading elsewhere. Um, Again, I'm just like
Yeah.
spitballing random stuff, but I don't know if there's any thoughts. That's an exercise that I like to do. I forgot where I got it from. Definitely some person that I respect that I listen to, but having the view of, okay, if I had to do this, like gun to my head, you have to solve this problem within 5 years or you die. Like, and you have to actually there's the fact that there's so much use in if you have to solve a problem that you'll find a way compared
Mhm.
to like I can't solve this problem or like I don't need to think about this. I think there's a lot of beauty in that. Like
Yeah.
we're just
Interesting.
framing things that way makes you think of things that you thought you probably couldn't have thought of. But yeah, I'm
Yeah.
to hear your thoughts. If you had to solve that problem, Amanda Kahn, where would
Cool.
you start?
Okay. I'm going to take a short view and a long view on this so I get
I
two
love it. Yeah.
solutions.
Yeah.
Okay, so the short view is that plants need nutrients to grow, and so why not take advantage of that? So we already do lots of aquaculture. There is effort to do integrated aquaculture, which basically grows fish alongside filter feeders that can eat the fish poop and alongside algae that use up the pee from those animals.
Mhm.
And so it's a way to try to make it this sort of closed system. And I think it would make sense to put mariculture operations, which are things that are growing up seaweeds
Mhm.
near the base of rivers. And then the seaweeds are going to take up the nutrients as they're flowing out, and it's going to grow up your aquaculture, and it's going to hopefully remove some of at least the excess nutrients. And then we would harvest those seaweeds instead of spurring a big plankton bloom.
That's
So that's
really
my short
smart.
term. I think that,
I
you
yeah,
know,
I'm excited to hear your long
cool.
term, but that's really smart of an approach just because you're kind of just redirecting instead of saying like, hey, like this just stuff free floats and the bacteria attack it and that's creating taking out the oxygen. We can kind of potentially make a barrier of some other
Yeah.
living organism that we already do like farm and just it's like here,
Yeah.
wall of seaweed, you absorb all this runoff. We're gonna use you anyway, like protect the oceans. That's a beautiful solution.
I like it, especially if you could, you know, I don't know how much we'd have to get people to want to eat seaweed more. Um, Or maybe we would then harvest that seaweed and chop it up and put it back in the fields, because those nutrients were probably stuff that they wanted in the fields
Yeah,
anyway. So
exactly. Yeah.
there's a lot of cool full circle stuff we could do.
Mhm.
But that's my short-term solution, because the reason that these are happening is because we've lost a lot of the filters that we had in place before. So wetlands are natural filters for not just nutrients, but also a lot of the pollutants that would be coming out, which the seaweed solution would not solve. So, you know, restoring wetlands, or helping to make sure that wetlands are present both alongside rivers, and then especially there at the base, or at the mouth of rivers, I think is really important, because we've lost those filters. So instead, stuff just comes out undiluted and unfiltered into the ocean.
So
So,
what killed off and reduced those wetlands? And that's not an area
oh,
I know too well. I mean, I know
yeah,
they've been
our development.
yeah, I was gonna
So,
say that because you said it stops pollutants. Did we just put
yeah.
too much where it couldn't stop it and it just killed it?
Well, people like to live along the coast, and as populations grew toward wetlands, they're smelly. So it's really common that wetlands would get filled in with dirt to make them no longer wet, and then they would build on them. So actually, it's just that we've built over the wetlands.
Mm-hmm.
um, and that's tough too, because the houses or the towns that get built in those places have lost their buffer from storm surges and waves and things like that. I mean, there are a lot of problems that are happening that are totally related to sea level rise, but that we don't have buffers for anyway, like storm surges. Those would typically have gone through wetlands first, and that would have dissipated a lot of energy. And instead, we've got developments that are built right up to a fairly open coastline. And so they don't have those kinds of buffers anymore, both from the physical stress in times of storms, but also, you know, in this case, the ocean doesn't have the buffer from us.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think wetlands are understated, undersung heroes in just kind of cleaning up that bridge between land and sea.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my long-term solution. And there are a lot of people working hard on wetland restoration. So it's not that it's not happening, it's just that there's not a lot of support for it, and it's not happening quickly because of that. So that's why my quick solution is there, the quick fix until we can get people to agree that we need wetlands.
Mm-hmm. And it's important, yeah, it's always important to have both of those approaches kind of down, because yeah, usually,
Yeah,
yeah. Um,
yeah.
what goes into restoring the wetlands? How do they go about that?
Um, I am less well versed, but there's someone at Moss Landing who does a lot of that actually. And I think a lot of what they do first is they'll assess what the wetland used to be like there, because they're, you know, wetland is a term, but it covers a lot of different types of habitats and types of wetlands. So they'll look at things like the sediments that were there and what plants used to live there back in the past. And then you need to make sure that the sediments end up at the right height so that you can then plant wetland plants that would stabilize those sediments.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's part of it. Like, just like a hillside, if there's a fire, I live in California, we have a lot of fires. And once a fire goes through an area, you lose the plant life that was on top of the hillside, and the topsoil is exposed. And if there's heavy rain, we end up with mudslides, which end up in the news. But that, you know, is basically you've lost that soil because there's no plant root stabilizing it.
There's no ground.
So the same happens with wetlands. You would need to start planting plants in mud to start getting them to stabilize the mud so that then they can bring in more mud and spread. Yeah. So it's a multi-step process, but yeah, there are certain what we call foundation species that help. Sorry?
I said that's a difficult process to tackle, and like problem because it takes.
Yeah.
It's probably a pretty hard thing to man make, and it takes a while. So it's just obviously the better approach is not to kill them in the first place. But yeah. That's interesting.
Preferably, yeah. It's tough. I hate putting on my environmentalist hat for a second. You know, I grew up in San Francisco Bay and was involved with the wildlife refuge near here, the Don Edwards San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge. And they've been working for a long time on restoring some of the ponds that used to be used as salt ponds, basically to mine salt that we eat.
Mm-hmm.
Restoring a salt pond back means first getting all the salt out so that you don't have salt leaching in and making things too saline to kill things, and then filling it in, letting the tides come in and out and flush it, and breaking down the levees that used to affect the way water flowed so that you can actually get a tidal flat that can then be filled in with plants, and
Mm-hmm.
then let the plants grow and not know which plants need to dominate. So keep the non-native species out,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can give the wetland a chance to get kind of established first. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's a lot of steps involved in that. And I, think about it, they would like to do this for more of the salt ponds that are in the area, because there's still a lot of salt ponds, but it's a big process for each one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's better if new developments don't fill in wetlands and say, oh, we'll just build another one, because it's a
Is there any
big
kind of
task to do
regulatory
correctly.
body looking at that? Like once
Yeah,
you've already
there
seen
is.
why the wetlands are important, it's like no more doing that. No more
Well,
filling them in.
yeah, but there are a lot of competing interests. So a
Yeah.
lot of the time what happens is, if there's a big company that wants to develop on wetland land, or they want to buy it, then they can say, we will create an equivalent wetland of equivalent area to what we destroy. And so that sounds good, but whether that is actually produced and whether it's truly a wetland that's functioning in the same way, that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a 50-year question,
Yeah.
who's going to look
Yeah.
back 50 years from now and say, did this company really make a wetland that functions the way of the one that they
Mm-hmm.
cut out? Or did they just dump some dirt in, plant a couple plants, and call it done? I don't know. And I'm sure there are regulatory bodies that do check those things. I'm just not as privy to those.
Yeah, there's a equivalent kind of area. I bet it happens in a few different sustainability areas. Like I learned within this last year or two of that kind of trade going on in like the carbon emissions world, where it's like you can, like, if you're like a company, you can just like carbon offsetting, like that industry. I hate that. It's just like at the base, just super dirty. Like, let us do
Yeah,
this horrible thing that releases a bunch of carbon, but we'll like plant a bunch of trees over there for sure, for sure. Or we'll just like invest this much amount of money into offsetting
yeah,
carbon
for sure.
over here. It's like, yeah, but that's not instantaneous. So you're still putting things like, even if that system was to work, you should like buy like twice as much carbon to fix that you're going to be doing, just because of the timeline. And you
Ooh,
don't know if that's going
interesting.
to happen. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah,
Yeah, no,
I
I
forgot
agree.
about
I thought the whole idea of carbon credits is just a way for places that are already rich and able to pay to continue to emit. And
yeah,
that's
exactly.
really,
Yeah, there's also
those
that.
are the larger sources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't like the carbon offsetting industry. Well, I mean, I like the
I
goal
don't
of
like
it, but it seems like,
it.
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, just because we're winding down here, and I don't want to cut too close to your call. There's two real last questions that I definitely want to make sure to ask you. The first is just, I think I kind of touched on where you get kind of your information, the things you like to read and keep up on. Kind of off of that, just any books, movies, what are the things either recently or just even way further down, like in your life, that meant the most to you, like touched you somewhere, got you excited about this field? It can be fiction, nonfiction, technical
Ooh.
stuff, philosophical, doesn't matter, but just things that really you remember triggering all this passion in any of these ways.
Okay. Okay. Nonfiction, there are two. So
Yeah.
one is a classic, Rachel Carson's The Silent Spring. This is a book written by Rachel Carson, who was a biologist and naturalist who talked about the effect of pollutants
Mhm.
on, basically on the ecosystem. And it was kind of the first environmental call to arms that I was suddenly alarmed. I read it and I went, oh my gosh, we need to do something about this. And I think that really fueled an interest in trying to figure out
Mhm.
something that I could do that could make a difference. And also, she just writes really eloquently. And then another nonfiction book that was pretty impactful to me was Song for the Blue Ocean by Carl Safina. So that's one where he spent a lot of time tracking tuna and the tuna fishery and how the tuna fishery has evolved over time. And he went into other fisheries too, but I think he kind of framed it in tuna. And I'm not a fish person,
Mhm.
kind of, and actually don't even like seafood, so I don't eat it. But I was so fired up about sustainable seafood even before I read that book. And after I read it, I was like, that's even more, it's even a bigger problem than that. I mean, think of the tuna. We're able to use technology to fish them at a greater rate. And actually, we don't know that our effort is, so we use this term in fisheries called catch per unit effort, which basically tells you how hard is it to catch the fish that you are going to catch. And if you fish a population down, your effort probably goes up, right? Because you're going fishing a lot more, but you're catching fewer of those fish.
Yeah.
But with tuna,
money, like effort in terms of money, like
it
cost?
is measured in terms of catch. So yeah, it could be money, or it could be landings, which is like kilograms of fish or tons of fish. So you can kind of do it. I think money more follows what the catch per unit effort is. If there's greater effort, then there's higher cost for the fish. Yeah. So yeah, it's more the quantity. But with tuna, he was pointing out that, actually catch per unit effort wasn't always reflecting what was happening with the tuna industry. And it was because it used to be that you could just go out with a small boat and go fishing and catch tuna. And then it became that they would, it got to the point where they would hire pilots to fly out over the ocean and look for tuna schools, and then they would radio it in, and all the boats would go there and target the schools. So it didn't feel like it was more effort for the fishermen themselves, because they were still able to catch plenty of tuna. But in truth, technology was enabling that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was where I was like, oh, technology can be used badly. And it's not like they're intending to use it badly. They don't recognize necessarily that the effort is increasing, or that the populations are in trouble. So it was kind of another call to action. Yeah. So those are really important to me. And then otherwise, I think the other thing that I read was a scientific paper. It was actually a series of them by my PhD advisor, Sally Lees. So she wrote a lot of papers about feeding and deep sea sponges and kind of how they work. And she wrote a review paper with Henry Ricewig, who's a big legend in the field, who actually just passed away this year. And she and he became my mentors. I contacted both of them and have worked with both of them because I just thought that reading about what they knew about glass sponges, which are the ones that I study primarily in the deep sea, kind of like the more you read, the more you're like, wow, this feels like everything we know about them. And I have so many questions. I contacted them and they said, no, you're right, we don't know most of that stuff. So it was just kind of a niche that I wanted to fill. So for me, that was a turning point.
Do you remember? Oh, okay. Sorry.
What about you? What got you into all this?
A bunch of random things. I've always, again, like I love kind of like the meaning of the oceans, like the call to them for all the reasons we discussed earlier. And I know I have, like what I care to do in my life is the entrepreneurship side. And I think there's a lot of availability for that there. Just like for that kind of thinking, for people to bring any of these things together and hopefully try to help in any of these areas. So I just felt it was something, I don't know, at least something that really pulled at me. And there's a bunch of other like little things, like there's even this like this anime that I love called One Piece, and it's about pirates. Yes. I love One Piece, but like that's something like I just love. There's things like that it just made me like love the oceans, and I want like the oceans to be more at the forefront of people's like minds in terms of how beautiful they can be, like the use you can get out of them safely, like protecting them. But yeah, there's just a lot of things that randomly called me there. I almost brought up one actually earlier when we were talking about the Benthic rover and everything. Have you seen The Life Aquatic?
Oh, yes.
That's that's literally my like top 2 favorite movies. I love Wes Anderson. Nice. And The Life Aquatic is like one of my favorite things in the world. But yeah, like that kind of ocean explorer archetype is like always been the coolest thing ever to me. Like you just have like a crew
Oh,
and you're out
good.
exploring
Yes.
the seas, finding out beautiful things for people. That's the coolest thing ever. Like, sorry, like not sorry.
Yes.
The coolest
I
thing
love
ever.
it. We've gone dressed as a group costume of Team Zissou and Operation
Me
Hennessy. We've done
too.
both.
So
Yay.
cool. I'm so happy
I
about
was an intern.
that. Yeah. That's so awesome. Do you have any like that? Like any movies or like, yeah, fictional like books that like kid or adult got you super,
Mm,
you just thought were cool? Like they're just like
I
awesome.
think I liked all the BBC documentaries actually.
Uh,
It's not the fun movies so much, but like I just
no, those
loved
me,
yeah, like David Attenborough talking about hydrothermal vents and the bizarre life that lives in the deep sea.
Carl Sagan in
It
it.
was so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, hearing I watched shallower ones too, hearing about corals and hearing Sylvia Earle talk about, the importance of ocean conservation and what we can do. I felt like, she knows what she's doing. Sylvia Earle's going to save the ocean. And that's cool, right? Like,
That's the
or
coolest.
Edith Witter exploring, deep sea squids. She had a recent one where she was looking for squids and communicating with squids and diving with Humboldt squid. It was cool. So
That's,
yeah, I love that stuff. Um,
yeah.
I nerd out about watching
Oh,
those things.
I
The
agree.
other thing that I know is happening now, a lot of friends with young kids have been contacting me about octonauts. So I haven't
I've
seen
never
it, but
heard of that.
apparently
Yeah.
octonauts. Oh, it's this cute little show. I think it's out of England, but
Huh?
you can watch it online. And it's these little animals that are explorer friends that go exploring the ocean. And every episode, they explore some different sea creature. And a lot of the time, they'll do deep sea ones. And apparently, they consulted with Mbari and they've talked to places to actually do accurate, like, representations
So
about
cool.
vampire squid. So my friend's 4-year-old daughter will be like, "Whoa, do you know anything about the Dumbo octopus?" And I'm like, "I've seen a Dumbo octopus. Are
Yeah.
you kidding? How do you know of this thing?" So I'm so impressed that people know of these things.
No, that's like, yeah,
Check it out. I
that's
haven't actually watched it, but it
I'm
sounds
definitely
like
gonna
fun.
check that out. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay. And here, last question off of that positive note. Um, in all the vastness of the oceans and everything you study, or just everything in that space, what gives you the most hope for the future? Hope, excitement, either in terms of it's just profoundly interesting to you and you just can't wait for a future world where we know all about it, or just like untapped potential that could help humankind or the world in the oceans, or anything at all. Anything, just what gets you the most hope and excitement?
Um, I
Doesn't
have
need to be broad
excitement.
either. It could be super niche. It could be about the glass sponges. Like
Oh,
it could be anything.
Oh,
Just
you give me too many then. But no,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
gonna I'm
maybe I
gonna
should
stay
have said.
broad. What gives me hope is I'm now in a assistant professor role, so I'm starting to mentor students. And every student who comes, they're so talented and they're so passionate, and like they're gonna change the world. So it's really neat to see how many people are fired up about trying to understand things about it and really care, and also just how ocean literate our world is becoming. So,
Mhm.
people understand that the ocean is responsible for half of the photosynthesis that occurs in the world. It's breathing for us, it's converting our oxygen for us. And I
Mhm.
think as we recognize those important roles, we'll recognize it more as a resource that needs to be left functioning rather than one that we can take from. So
Mhm.
yeah, I'm feeling optimistic that the students that I have are going to be the game changers, who can really kind of figure out these innovative things and turn things around.
That's
I
perfect. Yeah.
love it.
That's
Yeah.
a beautiful spot to end it. And I think it's a beautiful answer to that question. And yeah, I just want to thank you again. Yeah, I hope you know you've helped me a lot in those ways too. Like I definitely, I think I guarantee your students are getting so much out of you. You're a fantastic mentor. I know you're helping them a lot. And it's beautiful getting to talk to you about all these things. It's helped me understand a lot. It's motivated me a lot more in a lot of these areas. But yeah, thank you again.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for yeah, giving me an opportunity to talk about all of this.
Oh,
This
I
has
hope
been
that
great. And
yeah,
I think,
this
I
is the
mean,
first, but like I could have you on every week. Like I love talking to you about all this. Like as much time as you have, I will greedily scoop it up. Like
yay. Yeah, well, you'll have to come out to Moss Landing sometime. We'll take
I
you
would
out tide
really love.
pooling and we'll Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we gotta show, I have to introduce you to some sponges, clearly.